Well, hello all. Today I want to talk about why Christians should not fear the geologic column, paleontology, and the whole science that has to deal with ancient plants and animals. So, I know that many Christians would be scared of studying paleontology because they don't even believe necessarily that the Earth is that the universe is 13.7 billion years old, and that the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old, and that life's been around for 500 million years. So all the science would you would say would frighten most Christians. And so I don't think that too many of them have studied the fossil record, and I'm sure that they are scared of it. But the good book says that the heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament shows his handiwork. So in studying paleontology and seeing all the fossils in the fossil record, you actually begin to see creation. You actually begin to admire and think, wow, God, this is so great. I see creation, creation, creation. You see, when you obviously study in a sort of a atheistic university environment, obviously everything is going to sound like it's evolution. They're going to force feed you evolution. And that's what happened to me back in the 70s when I was doing a Bachelor of Science degree, and did 3 years botany, 2 years zoology, geology, biochemistry, chemistry, etc., philosophy of science. Boy, we were force fed. Everything was presented from the evolutionary point of view. And at the age of 16, 17 to 21, I didn't believe in evolution, but I would still write the exams and say evolution teaches this. I didn't say I believe this. I just said evolution teaches it, but I kept my powder dry, so to speak. I didn't have any real answers for it. But it was only very much later, when I was in my 60s, that I started looking at paleontology, because paleontology gives you a perspective on everything you've learned about plants and animals and the so-called evolution of them. And when you look at paleontology and the geologic column, you see that Earth's life's history is punctuated by what are called adaptive radiation events. You would call them creation events. Like, let's say, the Cambrian Explosion. It's an explosion of life at the very beginning of the geologic column. Explosion of life. Most of the various types of phyla that we see on Earth still today popped into existence almost instantly. Now you've got to get ears for listening to the dates given by the scientist about the geologic column. You know when they say that these things happened over a few million years. Well, in evolutionary time, a few million years is like a blink. It's not time enough for all the phyla that you see around today for just to suddenly pop into existence. And when I was at Wits University being taught all this crap, we were told, that this amoeba, the protozoa, slowly developed into the Coelenterata, the um, what do you call them, jellyfish, and the Portuguese men of war, the hydras and the so on, and then these developed into, the flatworms, and then the roundworms, and then the arthropods, and then the eventually later on only did we get the mammals developing from that, the vertebrates and the chordata. So all this stuff was, we were told that this developed into that, and slowly over millions of years these slowly changed the one into the other. But actually, when you look at the geologic column, they all pop into existence at more or less the same time. So interesting to it should be almost compulsory that you go to study the geologic column at the same time as you study the so-called evolution of plants and animals. So I say that you should make the geologic column your friend. You should be, when you read Genesis chapter 1, it's actually the beginning of the Holocene. It's not God creating the sun, the moon, the stars. In Genesis 1, verse 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then in verse 2, the earth becomes without form and void due to a mass extinction. And then after that mass extinction, God in 7 days creates the Holocene. And on day 4, he appoints the sun, the moon, the stars to be for signs and for seasons and for holy days and for weeks and for months. He doesn't create them then. And the light that appears on day 1 when he says, let there be light, is how God is thinning the atmosphere and cleaning up the very dense atmosphere after a mass extinction so that light could again penetrate the earth, and so the Holocene animals could now thrive and be fruitful and multiply. So when you clean up your theology, you realize that science, which talks about a 13.7 billion year old universe, is not, you don't have to fight it. The Bible doesn't say when the universe was created. And when you understand that Genesis 1 verse 1 is talking about a recreation, the earth became without form and void, or tohu and bohu in the Hebrew, became chaotic and confusion. God didn't create it that way, as Isaiah 45 verse 18 says. So, as I say, only in my 60s, 65 or so years of age, did I start to go onto, I think it was a forum called Theology Online, and we started talking about paleontology, and here were some brilliant atheists, and they would know their stuff. I mean, these were high-powered people. They must have been quite doctors and professors in their real life. I don't know, but they really knew their biology. And you had to know your stuff to argue against these evolutionist guys. But I would like to today show you the geologic column and just show you where you, as a Christian, need not fear it. So let's just try and see if we can call up this geologic column and see if we can just, let me see if I can move it here. The geologic time scale. So here you see it starts with a Cambrian explosion. So in the Precambrian era, God had seeded the oceans with basically plants that produced oxygen, and the oxygen caused the seas, the iron in the seas, to kind of precipitate out as iron oxide, and the seas became rich in oxygen, and then the atmosphere became rich in oxygen. And then in the Cambrian, you see there was nothing, and then suddenly all the various phyla that you see on Earth today appear, almost all of them, and suddenly. Now, I don't say that the exact same animals appear, but the phyla appear. So that is the groups, the main groups of animals. So they had their own completely distinct types of animals in the Cambrian, even up to what looked like little fish, which in other words, almost chordata, things with not a backbone yet, but with a cord that ran, a nerve cord that ran down the back. So, and you had the trilobites that looked like arthropods. They looked like horseshoe crabs of today. So they were their own unique species. And then you had all these changes. Each of these lines, the Cambrian, the Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, and then you had the Carboniferous, and then the Permian. So it's almost like in each of these different eras or epochs, you had life of a different sort, say life mostly in the water at first, then life on land. So God is slowly creating these different forms of life, first in the water and then on the land. And then you get a mass extinction that occurs at the Permian-Triassic boundary. And you had therapsids and animals that looked almost like the megafauna that you were going to get then during the Tertiary period. So it's almost like a curtain comes down on a whole group of animals. There's a mass extinction here, but there have been many mass extinctions and many creation events. And then suddenly God creates a whole lot of new animals almost instantly. Obviously, you've got to ignore the speak from the evolutionists who will say, oh, it occurs over millions of years. It could have been instantaneous that God created these. And so then you had the whole age of the dinosaurs, and then God gets tired of that, and then 66 million years ago you get another mass extinction. Then you get the megafauna, which is the age of the mammals, all kinds of strange looking mammals which you don't get today, but bigger ones than we see today. The mammoths and the saber-toothed tiger and the giant sloths and things here that look like rhinos. And so you get the megafauna, and then you get another sort of a mass extinction at the recent era, which is the Holocene. They don't put a Holocene there. So after the Pleistocene, you get a only a tiny little mass extinction, and then you get all the domesticated animals and plants seem to pop into existence along with modern man and modern culture and modern society, and humans that are building civilizations. Before that, you don't get any humans that are building civilizations. So this is the creation of Adam and Eve. It occurs in the geological column during the Holocene. It's called the Age of Man, and that's from about 12,000 years to the present. And that 12,000 years, again, don't get confused by the dating. It may have been that it was 6,000 years ago, and then there was a flood in between, and that flood then made it look like it was 12,000. I don't know. But you always have to keep a loose interpretation of the time scale in mind, because the rocks are quite hard to read the exact times. So I say that when you're reading Genesis chapter 1, you're reading actually the creation of the recent era, which is the Holocene, the Age of Man, where you see the predomination of cattle and sheep and goats and cows and pigs and dogs and cats and pigeons, and you're getting modern plants like bananas and peanuts and citrus and obviously all the wheat crops like barley and rice and maize. And now all of those that I've just mentioned suddenly seem to become hugely prevalent in the Holocene. In other words, they're not really there till 12,000 years ago. Again, human societies are not really there till about 12,000. You don't find great cities or buildings or anything before about 12,000 years ago. So God is... So this is where the Bible picks up the story, which is 12,000 years ago, or you could say 6,000 years ago. I say that I haven't fully resolved in my mind whether the Holocene was the beginning of Genesis chapter 1, or whether there was a flood in the middle of the Holocene, and maybe Genesis chapter 1, the 7 days occur somewhere in there. But sometime during the Holocene, Adam and Eve are created, and with all the modern animals, plants, cereal crops, domesticated animals, etc. So, as I say, I find it so interesting, and this is why I don't fear it, that there's clearly these reptilian-looking dinosaurs. We all know that dinosaurs don't look like mammals. So they die out 66 million years ago with a giant meteor that crashes into Earth and wipes them out. And then all of a sudden there's this, it's called adaptive radiation by evolutionists, but it's a creation event by God. All this megafauna comes into existence, and they exist until 12,000 years ago, when all these strange looking giant mammals die out. And then you get the start of the Holocene, where you see all the modern animals that we see today. I mean, you should look up what do the megafauna look like. They look crazy, strange beasts. Not at all like today's modern mammals. And then about 12,000 years ago, you get all the modern, everything that you see around us today. And that is more or less the time that the Genesis 1 is picking up the story. So the Bible is only interested in man and the salvation of man. It's not going to tell you about this whole geologic column. You read about that in the rocks. You go and study the rocks. So there's a mass extinction here, there's a mass extinction here, and there's all kinds of, after each mass extinction, there's this huge adaptive radiation event that occurs. So what I also find so interesting is that the Bible often talks about mass extinctions all the time. It's not like mass extinctions are new. Do you think the deluge of Noah was not a mass extinction? That's a mass extinction. And virtually all humans were wiped out except 6 souls that went onto the ark. That's Noah, his wife, and Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. That's, sorry, 8 souls that went onto the ark. So that's a mass extinction event, and that would have destroyed a lot of the air, land breathing animals as well, not the fish, obviously. And then we told about another mass extinction event that's going to occur when Christ returns. And that mass extinction event is going to wipe out most of the plants, animals, and humans when Christ returns. Now, I think we call it the end time or the apocalypse or whatever you want to call it, but let's just see if we can go to Revelation 6, verse 7. So when I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, "Come and see," and I looked, and behold, a pale horse. So this is the fourth horseman of the apocalypse. It's also called the fourth of 6 seals. And death and hell followed him, and power was given him unto them over the fourth part of the earth to kill with the sword, with hunger, and with death. So a fourth part of the earth dies here in Revelation 6, verse 8. And if you go back to Revelation 9, verse 15, and the 4 angels were loosed that were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year to slay the third part of men. So here you're getting a third of mankind destroyed. So we're first getting a quarter of the 8 billion people destroyed. That leaves us with 6 billion. And now we're getting a third of the 6 billion destroyed, which leaves us with 4 billion. And that is only 2 out of 18 sets of plagues. You get the 6 seals, or there's 7, but 6 of them are actual plagues. Then you get the 6 trumpets, and then you get the 6 vials. And that makes a total of 3 times 6 is 18 plagues, of which 2 destroy half of the world's population. So the remaining of the 18 plagues, that's 16 trumpet, vial, and seal plagues, are going to destroy most of the life on earth. That's a mass extinction. And then at the end of the millennium, there's going to be a baptism of fire. The whole earth's going to be consumed with fire, as Peter talks about. And anything that is not changed to spirit being is going to be destroyed. So that's another mass extinction. Then there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. So Christ comes to baptize us with water, and then at the end of the millennium, baptize us with fire. Anything that's hay and stubble, it's going to be burnt up, or wood. And anything, what it really means is anyone who's not spirit by that stage is going to be totally and utterly burnt up. So there's 3 mass extinction events spoken about, which are going to occur over a period of just on 7,000 years. So we've had the flood, we have Christ's return, that's another mass extinction. We have another mass extinction at the end of the millennium. And in fact, Genesis 1, chapter 1 is this cleaning up from a mass extinction. So we've had 4 mass extinctions spoken about in the Bible in the course of just on 7,000 years. And this is only, mass extinctions are common when you look at the geologic column. I've told you about them. So when one goes back to the geologic column, one can see that there are mass extinctions upon mass extinctions all the time that we are seeing. And so I mentioned how you get adaptive radiation or creation events that occur, the Cambrian Explosion. Then you get, as I say, there are many, but just the main ones here at the end of the Permian. Most of the Earth, over 90% of the creatures are wiped out, and we suddenly get a new biosphere of all these, which is predominated by our good old dinosaur friends. And at the end of the dinosaur thing ends 66 million years ago with a meteor that crashes into Earth. It leaves this iridium layer. We can see it. Probably crashed into the Gulf of Mexico, wiped out most of the life on Earth. Then we get the age of the mammals, which is the tertiary, quaternary. They call it the Cenozoic era. But even the megafauna are not suitable for humans, so God wipes them out. And then we get the recent, or the Holocene. And then all the domesticated plants and animals come along. So there's adaptive radiation, you could say, of all the domestic animals and plants and crops. And then there's adaptive radiation or a creation event here, where the mammals suddenly become predominant. There's a adaptive radiation here where suddenly the dinosaurs become prominent. And there's adaptive radiation here in the Cambrian explosion. These are all creation events. So what we read about in Genesis 1, the whole chapter 1, the 7-day creation, is an it's a type, it's one of many times where God has cleaned up the earth after it's been without form and void. The earth was without form and void after the Permian catastrophe, and there was most of the life was wiped out. And then the dinosaurs came to dominate. And then the earth was without form and void, and darkness covered it after the meteor struck in the Gulf of Mexico 66 million years ago. And then we had the megafauna creation. Who knows how many days it took God to create that? And then the megafauna became extinct, and then we had the Genesis chapter 1 creation, which took 7 days, and God in 7 days prepared the earth for modern man to live in, with modern animals, modern crops, modern cereal plants, modern fruits, modern everything, the angiosperms, lovely flowering things, lovely modern beautiful looking birds, everything small, things that we can rule over, whereas the megafauna and the dinosaurs would have been far too big for us to rule over. And so you don't find, for example, man found in the era of the dinosaurs. You don't find his footprints, you don't find his skeletons, you don't find anything there. You only find mankind in the Cenozoic, and particularly in the Holocene. And you only find traces of human civilization in the Holocene, which is within the last 12,000 years. So I'm saying the 12,000 years could be 6,000 years if there was a flood that was in the middle of it, the Noah flood. Maybe it made it look like it was 12,000 because there was strata laid down that people could have misinterpreted, that could have added another what looked like 6,000 years. I don't know. I haven't figured that out finally, but the geologic column should not hold any fear for us Christians.